if you remember, back in February, I was calling for a raise of rates of 12.5 basis points, 1/8 of 1%. I said they're not locked into 1/4% or 1/2 of 1%. They don't have to raise rates that high, but just start to notify the markets, put them on notice that we are going to do everything we can to try to maintain some strength in our currency, in our dollar. And we're going to raise rates a 12.5 basis points. That's a 1/8 of 1%. It is meaningless, but it would have opened the door for the next month or the month after that to raise another 12.5 basis points. And here you are, now you're at your 1/4% that it seems like they're always striving to get to. So they, it would have been the logical thing to do. Now you have some very well-respected guys on Wall Street talking about, first of all, core CPI. We don't care a lick about core CPI. And if the Federal Reserve this morning mentions core CPI, consumer price index, or mentions core inflation, of course, they're probably going to mention core inflation. Core inflation is probably running on the year. I'm guessing, according to the Fed's numbers, and I really am guessing at this, I'm going to say 4.2, 4.5 most percent. But real inflation, headline inflation, is running at over 5%, 5.4, 5.5%. That's the number they ought to be talking about. They probably won't, because it doesn't sound, anything with a 5 in front of it doesn't sound as good as something with a 4 in front of it, and they're going to downplay it. But so all these smart people now talking about what should the Fed ought to be doing now. I'm not saying it's too late. It isn't too late. The Fed ought to be acting right now, and the Fed ought to announce today at 2:30 or 2 o'clock when he starts speaking, he ought to say, we are looking at raising rates by the middle of November, by the 8th of November, by the end of the month, we're going to raise rates. They ought to be talking about it right now. They ought to be doing it and not hesitating. Because I think it's very, very important that we maintain some strength in our dollar. I think that's critically important. That's going to help inflation dramatically. It's going to check inflation. But we're going to get behind the curve again, and we're going to wait until inflation is totally out of control before we try to control it. And Ben Bernanke is the one that started all the garbage that, we can control inflation anytime we want. We're not worried about it. We don't care about it. We can control that. And it was one of the things that I absolutely despised about Ben Bernanke, the arrogance that they thought that, they were going to control inflation. Well, how's that working out right now? How's that working out? I'll tell you what's happening right now. What's happening right now is that we have figured out and have become convinced, obviously, that inflation is going to take on a mind of its own, just like interest rates are. They organically go up. Inflation will organically go up. We don't need the Federal Reserve to have inflation, which is obvious right now. Have you been to the supermarket lately? Have you been to the gas pump lately? Have you looked at commodity prices lately? We don't need the Federal Reserve to raise rates to have inflation. I mean, to not have inflation or to have it, raise or lower. It's got nothing to do with the Federal Reserve, but they can keep it in check. They can increase the strength of the dollar. By increasing the strength of the dollar, it theoretically or technically should lower inflation, or at least begin to keep inflation in check. And they're not doing it. They should have done it, like I said, February, March. And then, all throughout this year, they've had opportunities where they should have done it. They haven't. And they're going to wait until we get to 8% inflation, and they're going to try to do something. And all that's going to do is exacerbate the problems that by then we're going to be having in the economy. It's not going to help. But that's likely the way it's going to go. Why? Because it always goes that way. And it's not going to be any different now. And then we got smart people nobody's going to listen to me back in February. But you know what? If Bill Ackman would have said what he is saying today, like he should have said back in February, because he's He's smarter than the Federal Reserve. He knows better. He knew inflation wasn't transitory. Come on. And he should have said something then. Maybe they would have listened. Hey, remember to click the subscribe button right here on the screen. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when new content is added. And more importantly than anything, you don't want to miss all 3 live hours of Financial Issues every day from 9 to noon. And you can watch it on FISM.tv. That's FISM.tv.